I thought they were coming out to join me, but obviously not. So behind me, you can see already cartoons which show AJC's remarkable history in efforts over the course of the decades to promote tolerance, inclusiveness, acceptance, which is at the very heart, of course, of what AJC is all about, and has made it such a powerful force in the course not only of the life of American and global Jewry, but in society at large. I think we've heard some fascinating presentations. I'm sure you all enjoyed them. And as I was listening to them, I was reminded of the famous Jewish writer Israel Zangwill, who is apparently credited with the phrase, "Jews are like everyone else except more so." And listening, of course, to our Muslim speakers, one sensed, of course, the profound humanity that makes Muslims like everyone else except more so. And it's now my privilege to moderate a conversation, and with your permission and with theirs, I'm not going to pull any punches. There were things that I heard them say that were really wonderful, and some things which I think many of us would have some questions and challenges to be able to make. So it is my pleasure to invite our three wonderful speakers to join me up here and to face the music. While they are coming, let me remind you that you are all invited to take part in this discussion, which is not going to be easy, so not everybody's going to get a crack of the whip. But you have your opportunity to write in your questions, to send them, to pass them through. We are, of course, the state-of-the-art organization. These will come through me, through creative sifting processes to this computer, and we will try to do our best to be as inclusive as we can of your questions and challenges. So I'm going to go according to the order of the presentations. And I will therefore first ask my first question to Mustafa. Of course, you're right, Mustafa, that there was a great era in the past where Muslims and Jews and Christians lived together in mutual respect. It wasn't quite as long as some people make out. It wasn't always quite as hunky-dory as some people make out, but certainly there's nothing to compare with it in terms of human history. From that point of view, I'll grant you. But that was only feasible when everybody knew who top dog was. Yeah, we got along okay under Islam as long as we Jews and the Christians knew that we were under Muslim authority. You say that the conflict really between Muslims and Christians today is one over land and one over politics. And Irshad supported the claim with regards to the disease of politics. But the bond between the Jewish people and that land is not simply because of the Shoah, because of the Holocaust. It's not simply because of the need to have a homeland. It's because we have a spiritual legacy that binds us to that place. So my question to you now, in light of those two comments, is do you think there really is place in terms of the Muslim mind and the Muslim world for a thriving Jewish polity in its midst? Isn't the problem that Islam has a real difficulty in accepting any non-Muslim sovereign polity within the embrace of the Muslim world?
Thank you, Rabbi Rosen. Good questions, I must say. I appreciate them. On the first issue, yes, within the classical medieval Islamic concept, Muslims were the superior, the dominant faith community, and Jews and Christians were protected, but they were not unequal. And that's, of course, that's not something we can bring to the modern world as an example. It was better than being persecuted. That's why there's been a lot of migration from Christian Europe to Muslim world. However, I would like to underline the fact that the Ottoman Empire, the very seat of the caliphate, abolished that status and brought equal citizenship in the middle of the 19th century during the era that we call Tanzimat. And that's why this happened under the caliphate. That's why Jews and Christians became full equal citizens of the Islamic Ottoman Empire. And they
Still a caliphate.
it was a caliphate, but it was becoming like the Queen of England in that sense. I mean, full equality, equal citizenship were accepted, and that's why there were Jewish or Christian parliamentarians in late Ottoman Empire in the parliament. What happened after that was that Ottomans collapsed, and more parochial, rigid interpretations of Islam, such as Wahhabism, Saudi Arabia, became very much underlined because of the oil wealth and the political traumas of the Muslim world. So we lost some of the things in tradition, and things got even worse because of the political conflict. So I just would like to underline that it was possible to have full equality under Islamic concept in the late Ottoman Empire. Some Islamists are way beyond that. I mean, way behind that. I mean, when we look today in the Middle East. And the second point, as a Muslim, I have a commitment to Jerusalem. I would love to go and pray. I believe in going and praying in the Mosque of Al-Aqsa, but I can already do it. I mean, you just go there. There's Israeli soldiers asking you whether you're Muslim or not. You say, I'm Muslim, you pass, and you do it. The political sovereignty of the State of Israel doesn't deprive me from my right as a Muslim to do my prayers in Jerusalem.
So that's the only issue for you.
Sorry?
That's the only issue. As long as it's technically possible to live as a Muslim, there's no problem with sovereignty.
Theologically, from my perspective, yes. Of course, there are people who would not agree with this, but I would make a case against them. And actually, I even underline in one of my writings that actually, if we read the Quran carefully, the Quran grants that Jews have a connection with the Holy Land.
Yeah, that's explicit. And
yeah.
Indeed. But there is a debate over whether that is synonymous with sovereignty and whether that's compatible with it.
The Quran, from the Quran, you can certainly deduct the idea that Jews are connected to the historical land of Palestine, and they certainly have the right to be there. How we define that sovereignty is a modern political question. Nation states did not exist when we were having these questions in the Middle Ages. So I think theologically what Muslims should demand and have the right to demand is their right to worship in Al-Aqsa, which is a historic mosque for Muslims. But it's already present there. So I don't, if there's a one day a Palestinian state, and let us assume it's run by a communist North Korean like an ideology, I don't think it will be better for me as a Muslim than what I have right now in that part of the world.
Irshad, would you like to add anything on this?
No.
Okay, so let me then come back and then ask you, I mean, what you present, I think, is something with which all of us identify. But we identify with what you say as human beings. And when we hear you speak, we don't really think you're a Muslim because you sound as if you are basically an internationalist. You represent, the most beautiful tenets within our tradition. But are you really a Muslim voice, and can you really impact on a Muslim world?
Wow. I thought only God could decide if I'm Muslim or not. But I guess Rabbi will have that conversation.
That's why I asked you. I didn't make a decision.
No, actually, it's very interesting. You know, you said we don't really think that you are a Muslim voice. Who's we, Rabbi?
Well, I meant we. I thought I said, you don't sound to us if you are a
Who's us, Rabbi?
The AJC audience gathered here.
You know each and every one of them. You know each of their consciences. You know each of their souls.
She's challenged me.
Everything that's going on up
We
here.
can see you very well. Who thinks that Irshad really represents the mainstream of Islam?
No. You have asked now a very different question.
Okay, I'll ask her that question again.
No,
Who really?
I do not represent the mainstream. You and I both know that, and that's precisely why I speak as I do.
So do you think you can impact on it?
That's a good question. After all, mainstream Muslims are not reformist Muslims. That's why reformists need to exist. It's very logical.
Okay. So can reformists impact? Do you not want to impact upon the others?
Oh, of course we do. We meaning reformist Muslims. But first, we need to come out of the shadows. You see, it's not like people like Dr. Al-Mutawa and Mustafa don't exist. We actually exist in spades. What makes us so different, however, from the rest is that we've stepped up to hear and speak our minds. So we are in a very privileged position, the three of us and the more of us who, ought to be known by all of you. We are in a very privileged position to serve as role models and to give permission to other reformist Muslims out there. By the way, that is first and foremost the reason that I started the Moral Courage Project, because I have been hearing for the last decade, Irshad, I want to express my individuality to my parents, to my elders, to my mosque, to my madrasa. But how do I do that? And that is what the Moral Courage Project does, by the way, not just for Muslims, but for anybody in the world and in any human community in which corruption needs to be rooted out, precisely so that there can be integrity, not just of society, but first and foremost of the self.
Fantastic. So, well, let me then understand. So for you believe that Islamic teachings animate that vision?
I believe that there is raw material within the Quran that allows for that belief and the practice of that belief of moral courage to flourish. Islamic teachings, on the other hand, are, let's be honest, human constructions. Teachings of any kind, including yours, Rabbi, are human constructions.
So you believe the Quran, therefore, is a divine revelation, and that's what clearly makes you Muslim. You believe that the divine is the ipsissima verba, the word of God, the Quran.
I do believe that the Quran is divinely inspired. Is it divinely authored? History tells us no. But inspired? Yes. And that is why, Rabbi, I have faith, which is very different from dogma.
So that's great. I'm sure there's much more we could go on in terms of that. The questions are coming in fast and furious. But just quickly, with Naif, where I was talking about the fact that we're so similar, and also this point was brought up about the similarity between Jews and Muslims. I haven't had a fatwa on me, but there are some right-wing sites in the United States that call me a jihadi Jew for having anything to do with the Saudis. And then there is a site in Saudi Arabia in Arabic which is called Get the Zionist Jew Out of the King Abdullah Center. So what I wanted was not for you to endorse whether I'm getting it right, if I'm getting hit on both sides, but whether you think that, in fact, those sources that have issued the fatwa on you, and to some extent see me as a threat, a much smaller one, and that come from what Mustafa has described, essentially, as a Salafi, Wahhabi tradition, whether you think that that's the problem.
I have to go home after this. This is what I think. I think if oil had ever been discovered in the Vatican, Christianity would look very differently today. I think that a big part of the problem is interpretation. But I don't think in the end I think thought will win out over funding. I'm from Kuwait, and there's a tradition of pearl farming, or not farming, but pearl diving. And what's a pearl in the end? It's you have grains of sand that irritate the oyster, but eventually the irritations lead to something valuable. So whether it's the work I'm doing, the work you're doing, Rabbi, I think in the end it'll bear fruit, because it's the last thing that people kind of are surprised that I keep going back. That after graduating from business school, I thought about staying in New York, and my brother called me. My mother was upset. My brother said, because I was thinking about staying in New York, and my brother said you can go from being a small fish in a big sea to being a big fish in a small sea. And I said, that's great, Fahed. What if I end up being the dumb fish in the desert? But so far it's been okay. But I think a big part of it is interpretation, and which has been why, which for us, the people who've been trying to shut us out are people who want to control what Islam means. Here in the West, the right-wing groups want Islam to mean the terroristic cult of a pedophilic mass murder, pretty much. And back home, they want to measure it based on behavior they can observe. And so anybody going in to kind of challenge that, will end up being fought. Even though these two groups are at war with each other, they're really at war with anybody who can reclaim what being Muslim means. And in the end, that's what we talked about going to war over territory, over land. But our brains are more evolved. Animals do that. Chimpanzees go to war over land. Our brains are more evolved, so we go to war over lines in the sand. Lines in the air, which is what religious territory is in the end.
So you're basically saying we've got to stick in there for the long haul.
Yeah, I think we do. I think part of the problem in Arabia is the kind of, because the thing is that when you have an intolerant society, it kind of feeds on itself. So first you get rid of the people who are of the different religions. Then you start focusing on within your own religion the people who think differently. In the end, you end up kind of at war with your own brother because you have a different interpretation. And so it's about averages in the end. And the more voices that are missing, the more that average becomes an extreme.
Okay, with the first question that came up here from the audience says, basically, the Arab-Israel issue is not the major source of the real conflict that's going on. What's really tearing the Muslim world apart and having all terrible consequences in terms of the global peace is the struggle between Shia and Sunni. What do you think about that? Who wants to go?
Well, judging from my first marriage, that's probably correct.
So go ahead, Irshad.
Dr. Naif should know I'm still single, and if you want to talk, let's do it.
I've been remarried since, so.
Yeah, but you can have more than one, right?
Exactly.
And I'm working for the day when she can too. The last time I was in front of an AJC audience, actually, I made the argument, and it was a fairly controversial one at the time, but I stand by it, that in fact, it is the age-old, blood-drenched, tribal animosity, sheer, ugly animosity between Shias and Sunnis that is driving so much of the politics in the Middle East today, and increasingly also in diaspora communities around the world. It has often been observed, and I've experienced this myself, that people in Iran, for example, don't have nearly the kind of antipathy for Israelis or even for the Israeli government as they do for what they call the Arab conquerors. Because that's exactly what happened to Iran. It became part of the post-Islam Arab conquest. And many Iranians of all ages, not just youth, very much resent that. And so the case has been made, and I'm very partial to this case, that what's really going to be happening in the Middle East, down the line, is a showdown between the Sunni behemoth, that is Saudi Arabia, and the Shia behemoth, which is Iran. And that in many ways, Washington will be irrelevant in that showdown. And that if we really have our...
Interesting that you choose a Jewish word as the adjective.
Which is?
Because what you use behemoth comes from behemoth, means a Hebrew word for an animal.
Okay, that's why you're the rabbi. All right. But that doesn't mean you know everybody in this audience, sir.
You put me in my place. I accept it. I will not. I back down.
I think I'll say one other thing, and would love to have some corridor conversations with people about this afterwards, that if Washington does try to solve this in the way that it has tried to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Washington will become not even, it will no longer be a superpower. It will become, actually, in my view, a super pawn. I say, stay out of it.
I'm sure that our colleagues here have more to add, but I would like to be kind to the questioners, and there's one specifically for Mustafa. Would you comment on the state of freedom of speech and thought today in Turkey and how that impacts upon dialogue between the religions?
Wow, another good question, I must say. First, I should say I'm happily married and with my one and only wife, and that's the most important thing.
And I will confirm that he's got a very beautiful wife in the audience.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing I ever did was to marry her, I must say. Well, freedom of speech in Turkey is not looking bright. The Freedom House actually recently published a report about this, saying that Turkey has gone to the level of not totally free countries when it comes to the freedom of speech. It's still better than the dictatorships of the world, but there's a big regression. And that is so unfortunate because the current Turkish government began its life as a very reformist government, did very good things in the initial years, But as time goes by, the rule that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely has worked magnificently in Turkey. And the government tried to manipulate the media more and more. And that is mainly because of that, now we have a media that is not ranked fully free by Freedom House. Turkey was not probably any better in the years past, but then now there was this hope that things would improve. We unfortunately start to regress. And probably we'll discuss more this tomorrow about where Turkey is going. I mean, Turkey is a democracy, let's underline that, but it's not a liberal enough democracy. It's becoming an illiberal democracy with a elected but growingly authoritarian form of politics. And that's what I'm trying to criticize it. How this influences relations between religions? Well, in Turkey, we unfortunately have very non-Muslim communities. We had huge non-Muslim communities in the Ottoman Empire. Because of nationalism, not Islam, unfortunately, we wiped them out. Like the Greeks did to minorities in Greece, and Serbians did to minorities in Serbia. Nationalism was the biggest trauma in the Middle East in the modern age. We still do have a Jewish community, an Armenian Greek community. Interestingly, some reforms have taken place which actually benefited those communities in the past decade, partly thanks to EU reforms, partly thanks to the Ottomanist approaches of Erdogan, which is a kind of a loving sultan for his subjects. Some good things have taken place as well. But certainly Turkish democracy is at a stage which is not a stage that we can praise as a liberal democracy. We need a lot of change. And first of all, the government needs to change its assertive and divisive rhetoric when it comes to society, and it should stop trying to manipulate the media, which they do big time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I apologize to all of you who have questions here. We could carry on with this discussion for a very long time with such wonderful participants, and I would even be prepared to take more raps on the knuckles from Irshad Manji. I would enjoy this very much, and I think you would enjoy it, but unfortunately our time is coming to a conclusion. However, our session is not coming to a conclusion. I ask you to remain seated because we are about to pay tribute to an incredible heroine of our times, and I think you will all want to be here to pay tribute and to recognize this remarkable woman. So please remain in your seats while we say goodbye to our wonderful panel and thank each and every one for their contribution.